Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that takes a dense research, pulls out the key stuff, and gets it straight to you. Think of it as your shortcut to getting really informed. Today, we are diving deep into just one source, but it's a big one. It's an academic paper. Uses some really detailed modeling, actually, to show how a pretty radical energy future could work. It's called The Role of Energy Prosumers in the Transition of the Finnish Energy System Towards 100% Renewable Energy by 2050.
Yeah, and our job today, really, is to walk you through how this study simulated a path for Finland, a cost-optimized path, importantly, to hit 100% renewable energy, or RE, by 2050. And it's not just about swapping out power sources. This model integrates power, heat, and transport. And crucially, it tries to quantify the role of, well, what they call prosumers.
Okay, so prosumer. Let's quickly define that before we get lost. We're talking about basically anyone who uses energy, but also actively produces it too. So that could be you, maybe with solar panels on your roof, or a big company generating its own power, or even, say, an industrial plant selling off its waste heat.
Exactly. And the motivation, according to this research, is kind of twofold. One is just pure economics, getting lower energy costs in the long run.
Yeah.
And the other is, well, a desire to actually do something about climate change, to participate.
Right. And here's the really big hook, the main takeaway from this whole deep dive today. The study actually concluded that this massive shift to 100% renewables in Finland, it's not just technically possible, it's modeled as being economically feasible, like actually resulting in lower overall energy costs compared to sticking with the current fossil fuel system, which is pretty huge.
It really is.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Why Finland, though? What makes it, such an interesting place for this kind of modeling? It seems challenging.
Well, it presents a sort of perfect storm of challenges, actually, that make it relevant for a lot of industrialized countries, especially those in temperate latitudes. First off, Finland's highly industrialized. So national competitiveness is absolutely key. You can't wreck the economy, right?
Yeah.
They were, 15th in GDP per capita back in 2018. Any energy transition has to support that. Second, the climate. It's extreme. You've got serious seasonality, long, cold, dark winters, but then very sunny summers.
Yeah, right.
So if your system relies on variable renewables like solar and wind, you absolutely need really robust storage solutions to manage that difference, especially through those dark, high-demand winter months.
So unlike sunnier places, they can't just bank heavily on solar year-round.
Pretty much no, but they do have some advantages. Third, Finland's already, quite far along. They ranked second in the EU with almost 40% renewables in their final energy demand already. And fourth, like a lot of Europe, much of their existing energy stuff, power plants, boilers, it's getting old. It's nearing retirement anyway.
So the timing is right for a big change regardless.
Exactly. Major investment decisions have to be made soon, so it's kind of the ideal moment to think about a fundamental shift like this.
Okay, so the model suggests jumping now isn't just good for the planet, it's actually, fiscally smart. You mentioned lower costs. Let's get into the numbers because this is where it gets a bit acronym heavy, but the results are kind of surprising.
We'll try to keep the jargon down. Let's look at the levelized cost of electricity, the LCOE. Basically the lifetime cost. It was around 61 euros per megawatt hour back in 2015. The model projects that drops pretty substantially, actually, down to 53 euros per megawatt hour by 2050.
That's a decent drop for electricity, but the heat sector figures you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that's where you see some really dramatic efficiency gains. The levelized cost of heat, or LCOH, it falls from 29 euros per MWH down to just 20 euros per MWH.
Wow, that's like a 30% reduction in the cost of heat.
Well, it's not magic, obviously. It comes down to flexibility, flexible generation, strong connections between regions, and deploying lots of low-cost storage. We can dig into those specifics. But let's circle back to the prosumer for a second. Because this whole cost-optimized scenario, it really depends on people shifting from just passively using energy to having a more active relationship with the system. Which brings up a pretty big question. Just how much do these prosumers actually contribute, like quantitatively?
Yeah, the numbers here are kind of mind-blowing. The study models that by 2050, solar PV owned by prosumers, so homes, businesses, makes up slightly over 54% of all the installed solar capacity in Finland.
54%. So decentralized solar basically wins out over big utility-scale solar farms in their model.
Exactly. And in terms of actual electricity generated, prosumers crank out 31.5 terawatt hours in 2050. That covers 26%, a quarter of Finland's final electricity demand.
A quarter of the national load met by decentralized players making local decisions.
That's it.
Yeah, that's a huge shift.
It really changes the whole power dynamic, doesn't it? Literally, how the grid works, who's involved.
It absolutely does, and it's not just generation. The study includes prosumer batteries, too. They model about 31 gigawatt hours of prosumer battery capacity. And these batteries contribute another 5.7 TWh of electricity in 2050. That's about 5% of final demand just by cleverly storing and releasing energy when it's most valuable.
Okay, so this massive contribution really backs up that idea you mentioned earlier, the social driver, that sense of agency.
Precisely. When you can see that your solar panels or your battery are part of something meeting, 26% of the country's needs, your motivation likely goes beyond just saving a few euros. But we do need to pause and be realistic about that high latitude problem again.
Right, the winter darkness.
Yeah. The study is clear. Prosumer solar generates tons of energy in the summer when demand is actually lowest, and very little in those dark, cold winter months when demand peaks. So it just reinforces that a 100% RE system up there can't just rely on decentralized solar. You absolutely need system-wide storage and that sector integration we touched on. It's non-negotiable.
Which brings us nicely to that integration piece, because this is where the study gets really interesting, beyond just the prosumers. It found those big cost reductions, the lower electricity costs, that drastically lower heat costs, they only happen with deep integration or sector coupling of power, heat, and transport.
Right. And you see that coupling really clearly in transport first. The model shows transport energy demand more than doubling by 2050.
We are doubling, wow.
Yeah, but the costs actually decrease for most vehicles because of huge electrification cars, trains. Then for the tougher stuff like shipping and aviation, the shift is towards renewable biofuels and synthetic fuels.
Okay, so electrification and new fuels. But when we say coupling, what's the actual tech linking the, say, excess solar and wind power to these transport and heat needs?
That would be the electrolyzer. Electrolyzers become really critical, flexible parts of the system. The model projects, they use a massive 28% of all electricity generated.
28%, just for electrolyzers.
Yep, to produce about 46 TWh of hydrogen and synthetic fuels. So think about it. When it's super windy or sunny and the grid has too much power, that excess energy gets instantly converted into fuels you can store or use elsewhere.
Okay, so that helps balance the grid and creates fuel.
Yeah.
But you said the real win is in the heat sector.
Exactly. That's the synergy. The heat sector basically eliminates fossil fuel, combined heat and power plant, CHP. Gone. They get replaced mostly by direct electrification, lots of heat pumps, and some biomass for heat-only plants. But here's the clever part. The waste heat from making all that hydrogen and synthetic fuel via electrolysis.
The heat that's normally just lost.
Right. That excess heat gets efficiently captured and fed into the district heating systems. That is the main reason the levelized cost of heat drops so much.
That's incredibly efficient. You're using the same process to solve grid balancing, transport fuel needs, and cut heating costs. That changes the whole economic calculation.
It absolutely does.
I see.
And it leads to a pretty rapid decarbonization timeline, too. The study sees the power and heat sectors getting basically defossilized by 2030.
Which lines up with Finland's plans anyway, right? Coal phase out, nuclear retirement.
Exactly. So after about 2025, the model shows over 80% of Finland's remaining greenhouse gas emissions are coming from transport. And those get wiped out by 2050 through the electrification and the green fuels made possible by that sector coupling. Now, obviously, given that strong seasonality and relying on variable wind and solar, managing the peaks and troughs with storage is just absolutely vital for the system to work, for resilience.
Yeah, how does the model handle having potentially weeks with little sun in the dead of winter?
Well, the total electricity storage capacity modeled is huge, 113 GWh by 2050. But it's not all one type. It's split into different roles. For that big seasonal shift, the main solution is gas storage, specifically storing methane and hydrogen made from renewables.
Wow, power to gas.
Pretty much. You charge it up mainly in summer and autumn using all that excess solar and wind, and then you discharge it heavily during the cold, dark, high-demand winter months. Then you've got the prosumer batteries we talked about. They operate more on a daily or diurnal cycle, charging in the day, discharging at night.
Okay, seasonal and daily. Is there anything in between?
Yes, that's where ACAET comes in adiabatic compressed air energy storage. This acts as midterm storage. Think hours to weeks. Perfect for bridging, say, a week-long period with low wind. It buffers the system.
This all sounds very complex but logical, which leads us to maybe the most counterintuitive finding you mentioned. The grid paradox. Prosumers supply a quarter of the electricity, yet the study says they don't seem to lower the peak power load on the main grid. How does that work?
Yeah, this is really important for anyone planning future grids. The peak load, the absolute maximum power the grid needs to handle at any single moment, might actually end up being almost double the final amount of energy being consumed. The model shows a peak load of 33 GWU, but final consumption need is only around 19 GW.
Hold on. So the grid's biggest stress point in the future isn't from people using too much power, but from too much power trying to get onto the grid at once.
Exactly. Future grid peaks, according to this model, are driven by managing peaks in production from variable renewable energy wind and solar not peaks in consumption. Unless you actively manage or curtail that oversupply sometimes, the grid infrastructure has to be built sturdy enough to handle potentially all that wind and solar capacity hitting it simultaneously.
Wow. Okay. And that need for readiness for handling those production peaks leads to another point you raised, a potential concern. Needing 8.4 GW of gas turbines just for balancing. That sounds like a lot of fossil fuel backup, doesn't it? Especially if it only runs 2% of the time.
It's a fair point, and it sounds contradictory to the low-cost idea, right? 8.4 GW is significant capacity, only operating about 440 full load hours a year. But you have to view it as essential redundancy. It's the system's insurance policy. It's there for the absolute worst-case scenario, maybe a very cold, very dark, windless period in winter when storage is running low.
The ultimate backup.
The ultimate backup. But, and this is important, we need to remember the model's limitations here. It simulated Finland as an energetic island, meaning it didn't factor in buying or selling power with neighboring countries.
Ah, okay.
In reality, Finland is part of the interconnected European grid, so it's actually quite unlikely they'd need all 8.4 GW domestically. Much of that balancing could likely be handled more cost-effectively through power trading with neighbors.
So the researchers acknowledge the model shows high capacity there, but argue it's manageable in the real world because of grid interconnections.
Correct. So despite that specific technical point, the overall analysis really confirms the main message. A 100% renewable energy system in Finland, based on this modeling, looks like a resilient, low-cost, and actually low-risk option that's achievable well before 2050. And it's significantly helped by both those decentralized prosumers and that deep sector integration.
And as we wrap up, the study left us with a really interesting final thought, something for you, the listener, to consider about how fast this all happens. While the model clearly showed the economic drivers, people save money by participating the actual speed, and the sheer scale of prosumer growth might ultimately be pushed more by things beyond just the price tag.
Yeah, things like grassroots climate movements, how desirable society finds this kind of participation, that collective sense of agency we discussed. Those non-economic factors could be the real accelerators here.
A fascinating possibility. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We've been exploring the findings of the paper, the role of energy prosumers in the transition of the Finnish energy system towards 100% renewable energy by 2050.